couple things I'm going to show you guys. Love it. There is a guy, and I'm going to pronounce his name, but I'm sure I'm going to butcher it, and hopefully he'll tell me exactly how it is supposed to be pronounced. But a lot of you, I'm sure, have heard of him. But his channel name is ODIUPICKU. And I'm like I said, I don't know how to pronounce that, ODIUPICKU. But anyway, this guy on this channel, I really like a lot of his stuff. Absolutely love it, because he works a lot with gyroscopes and just all kinds of really neat stuff. And he's been on this gyroscope tear probably longer even than I have. So I definitely have to give credit where credit is due, because he was one of the original pioneers that picked up on the idea that the gyroscope is the one thing, well, not the one thing, but probably the one thing in my mind that is the biggest debunk of any type of sphericity or movement of the Earth. Which of course is the gyroscope. So he came out with a video during the week, on the 15th actually, as you can see. And one of the things that he uncovered in here is absolutely a killer. But it depends on how you look at it, because you have to understand that what he showed in here, which was basically the guys in the Skylab space station, which we know was all fake in the first place, they were doing experiments with gyroscopes. And ironically, the beauty of this burn, and that's the only thing I can call it, the beauty of this burn is he, while the astronaut is displaying the gyroscope motion and talking about precession and everything while on Skylab, he is letting it float, you know, in 0G. And of course, Skylab, like the ISS, is supposedly doing 17,000 miles an hour around the Earth. Well, so he astutely picked up on the fact that if you're going 17,000 miles an hour around the Earth, that in a period of simply 1 minute, you should have a gyroscopic precession of almost 4 degrees. Well, guess what? There is no precession. You guys are going to see this, and the beauty of it is that, of course, since we know that they're not really up there, you know, at 17,000 miles an hour running these experiments, what it does prove is that it leaves the Globers basically with two possibilities. And I actually wrote this in the comment here. And I wrote, oh my God, this is absolutely irrefutable. This leaves the ballers with only one of two options. Either admit that Skylab just proved that they were not in orbit of any sphere because of the lack of precession in the gyro, or admit that the Skylab clip had to be shot in a 0G plane, which it had to have been, of course, and it absolutely had to have been, and you'll see why here in a bit. This is absolutely brilliant, because there's no way the Globers can argue that there was too much friction in the gimbal apparatus because it's floating in 0G, thus making it sensitive enough to detect the slow rate of precession. You have just driven a stake through the heart of NASA and the ball Earth. Brilliant. Okay, and then I asked him for permission to play this, which he gave me, and he was very thrilled to see this. So let's go ahead and I'm going to definitely put this in the show notes, but I'm going to go ahead and pop forward here to where he actually shows the astronaut doing this, and this is beauty. And I'm going to go ahead and play this through in its entirety. So I'll go ahead and start this right now. Whoops, let me bring it up just a little bit more. And here we go, and let's take a listen to this.
On the third manned mission of Skylab, Jerry Carr had a chance to demonstrate the behavior of a gyroscope in 0G. Its stability and also its precision when a torque is applied to it can be clearly seen in weightlessness.
Now let me just show you. What I have here is just one of the little hand gyroscopes that you can buy at the dime store. And first of all, I want to show you about what a body does when it's in 0G, and that is when you let it go, it just drifts. Now, if you translate that body, or if you hit it, it moves in translation, and it also tumbles. You notice it tumbles the whole time. And we can hit it in a different direction, and it just keeps on tumbling and moving in the direction you hit it. There's no damping. There's no effort on the part of the body to maintain itself in the position that it was in the beginning. my gyro. There's my string, looking to get tangled. Now I'm going to turn this little rascal loose. There. Okay. And I'm going to use these two soda straws in order to provide the forces that I need. Now,
okay, now I just want to comment here. What he's done, of course, is as soon as he let go of the gyro, he took a line and marked its axis of rotation. Okay, and then he's going to do this over several different spots as he's maneuvering the gyro around, and he's going to do it for nearly 50 seconds. So just keep an eye on this.
I've got this gyro spinning quite fast now, and now notice when I hit it with a straw or deflect it. See, it moves in translation, does it? Just exactly the way it did before. But you notice that when I hit it, it doesn't want to tumble or drift in rotation. It maintains its rigidity in space. And this is a principle that's very widely used in spacecraft. Now, remember I told you that the spin axis is up this way, the rotation is this way, and that's the way I've got it set up on this gyro now. Now, if I push on that side of the disc, I expect the gyro to tip this way and show the bottom to you. So let's see what happens if I do that.
All right, and there it is. So he did the math, shows the time that he's going through space, the distance traveled, 3.72 degrees, is the amount that the gyro should have precessed if they were actually going around a ball. Of course, as we can see by the 5 parallel lines there, the gyro did nothing of the kind. In fact, it stayed absolutely solidly rigid in space. Now, one of the biggest criticisms that we've had from the Globers is that they're saying that the gimbals are too restrictive to allow the motion of the gyroscope to precess due to the slow rotation of the Earth, which of course is just stupid. Okay, there we have, you know, if folk call could do it 170 years ago, we could certainly do it with our 21st century highly precision engineered gyroscopes of today. As you can see, he has drawn the green lines, which would indicate at least a 3.7 degree precession, and every single one of these shows it as absolute dead zero, and this is floating in 0G. So you can only conclude one of two things. If they really were whizzing at 17,000 miles an hour, this would totally annihilate the idea that they were, that they had any angular motion, thus causing the gyroscope to precess, or they were just on a vomit comet and they only traveled, you know, what, 8 miles forward or something like that during that 1 minute at 500 miles an hour. So there you have it. I think this is a pretty conclusive burn on this, and big thumbs up to ODIUPICKU, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right, for finding this, and I will definitely put this in the show notes. But absolutely brilliant, and you know, as far as I'm concerned, this is undebunkable. What do you guys think?
Yeah, that's a good find. And yeah, you'd think that gyroscopes should obey the law of, one of the laws of gyroscopics is that they do maintain their rigidity in space, but that it should have phased out of that perfect axis, as he said. So yeah, that's a excellent, or precessed out of it. That's excellent proof. Yeah, that's great.
Can you guys explain it to me like I'm an idiot, which isn't really a stretch? Explain how that makes sense when you're talking about the ISS always being at the top of the globe. So if really each person occupies the top of the globe, then wouldn't the case be that the gyroscope would stay in its perfect alignment however it's spun?
Well, we know.
I'm missing.
Yeah,
that.
No, I know. I understand what you're saying, and obviously the ISS is not staying at the top of the globe. That's impossible, because as it goes around in its quote-unquote orbit, it is continuously falling down the side. So theoretically, in orbital mechanics, you would have a vertical drop that would match your forward velocity, and therefore you're constantly in a fall. But nevertheless, you know, gravity is still pulling you back towards the Earth, supposedly. So the ISS would have to be necessarily going around nose first, and when it gets to the bottom of the Earth, it's going to be upside down. The only reason that NASA, I think, tells you that you've got to be, that you're always on the top of the globe, is just for a point of reference, and also to confuse people, because, you know, their whole shtick is that there is no up and down in space, which is patently absurd, and we know that by many experiments at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know, you gotta, for someone that's never really looked into gyroscopics and how they work, it's a pretty, I mean, it's hard to explain, but once you understand it, it's pretty easy to understand. And essentially, like, for example, you could take a gyroscope and lay it flat on a, you know, piece of wood or something. And if you go and start tilting that piece of wood in all strange directions, the gyroscope will maintain its perfect axis. So it's not going to tilt around with the wood. It's going to stay, you know, 90 degrees from the ground, vertical. And the same thing applies to, you know, whether it's a plane in flight or the ISS hypothetically orbiting. You should see, and people are going to argue, well, gravity does this and gravity does that. But that's not the point. The gyroscope is going to maintain its axis regardless of what you do to its gimbal or whatever it's housed on. And so for the ISS,
See, that's where I'm confused. Is it okay? So it maintains its axis, so that's what we just saw it do.
Yep.
So what? How are we then saying this is?
Because if it was maintaining its axis, you got to understand that the ISS itself would be phasing out of that alignment.
Gotcha.
So
It would be rotating around it.
Yeah,
It would be
so-
rotating around it, right?
so
Thank you. That's
it
what I
would
need.
be the gyroscope would apparently be tilting on its axis, but really it would be the gyroscope would be maintaining its axis and the ISS sort of tilting around.
There you go. Thank you. That's
yeah.
what I was missing. I was
Okay.
not thinking that
Yeah.
way. Thank you.
Okay. Yep.
Yep. So yeah, and that's exactly what's going on now. Of course, one thing that always, you know, I told you last week that I've been looking into orbital mechanics, and I had one gentleman that was nice enough to send me a huge PDF on it, 500 pages, which of course 99% of it is solid math, but they also get enough, you know, plain language theory in there. It makes it, you know, at least understandable to somebody that doesn't want to go through every single one of the equations. But the one thing that still confuses me about how how anything orbits is, if you look at the NASA animations about the ISS going around the Earth in orbit, it's funny because there's always a forward-facing direction to the ISS, and for whatever reason, the nose of the ISS is always dipping down around the Earth. So for whatever reason, gravity seems to be pulling the nose of the ISS down, so that when it is upside down or on the bottom of the Earth, supposedly, it literally is inverted from the position where it was, you know, on the top of the globe. So what exactly is it about gravity that pulls the quote-unquote nose of the ISS over? That's still something that eludes me, and maybe somebody that's a lot smarter than I am in orbital mechanics can explain that to us, you know, in the comments of the show or something like that. But to me, it just seems to me that if it's falling continuously, it would be moving forward, it would be falling down the side, therefore it would be going down the z-axis, and the Earth would actually be behind the ISS, and then as it gets to the bottom, then it would actually start going backwards, right? That's how it would seem to me, but for whatever reason, the nose seems to, you know, kind of pull it all along and actually inverts it.
Or
So,
if you bring up the ISS live and they show you the picture that's usually from the top looking down, I mean, how can anybody say that that is falling but missing the curvature of the Earth? It's clearly not. It clearly, if it's falling from that height, it would just fall and hit the ground. It's not going
Right.
so fast that it wouldn't hit the ground. That's ridiculous.
yeah, exactly. So there's so many things about orbital mechanics, and like I said, when you look at the math, it's purely a mathematical construct. It's absolute fantasy. There is nothing that we can replicate it with here on plain Earth. It only goes. This only works when you're up above a ball, supposedly, that actually has gravity, assumption after assumption after assumption after assumption. It's all a big mathematical construct, and the only thing that we have to back it up, of course, is CGI. You know, and we're looking at this, and here's you know, this is weird too, because, well, this could be a back-looking camera, but it always seems like you're right, Jaron, like you're right over the top of the ball. So how does it keep missing that edge without falling directly into the earth? It seems to me that if you had anything forward-looking or even rear-looking, you certainly wouldn't be seeing much of the front of the earth in the camera, right? Because if you're always on the edge falling down, why is it we're seeing so much of the plane, supposedly, right?
Absolutely,
So,
I totally agree.
Yeah, so it's just bizarre, and you know, that's why we did so many ISS shows, just watching the ridiculousness of it. Because it really is, it's silly. The whole concept is absolutely a mathematical construct and a product of imagination. So yeah,
Well,
so there they are.
The other thing too, due to the curve of the orbit, you would expect like that free-floating gyro or the astronauts inside to essentially be compelled towards the outside edge of that orbital path. But you can see that they maintain a fixed sort of frame of reference with this craft, when technically when he releases that gyro, or anything that's not holding on to the interior of the ISS should be sort of flung or compelled away from towards the outside edge of the path, and you never see that. So yeah, they're full of it.
Yeah, they got too many things that they pick and choose when to employ them and when not to. And that's an example right there, is that you would think that people would be hitting the outside edge of it, but then they'll just come back and say, no, it's always at the top and the middle. But they just change it all the time.
Hey, guys,
Absolutely.
I got a question.
Hey, David.
Hey, I might be dumb here, but let's just start with the ISS. If the ISS is falling, like they say, what makes it rotate with the Earth? Why wouldn't it stay rigid in space, or would it rotate with Earth? Does either one make sense?
Well, that was exactly the question I was just asking, that I don't understand. What is it that pulls the nose of that thing down, supposedly, so that it stays, the bottom of the ISS stays parallel to some degree with the surface of the Earth, instead of, you're right, why is it rotating? What about gravity is causing that to happen? And that's a good question, David.
Yeah, and if it doesn't have gyros stabilizing it, all of the running around, especially when you're chasing a gorilla, wouldn't that send the thing toppling off, in different directions? But the main question I had, that was my second question, is when you're showing this gyro thing and you're saying that is done in a 0G plane, doesn't a 0G plane do a big, huge, faster parabolic arc? And wouldn't we see that thing precess almost 90 degrees or more if it wasn't a 0G plane?
The answer is yes and no. Yes, we're not going to, the reason it is doing an arc, yes, but the reason that we're not seeing any precession in the gyro is because we are not moving forward far enough to compensate for any quote-unquote curvature of the plane, right? Because remember, if you're in its vomit comet, the best you're doing is 500 miles an hour, right? And we also know that they can only do this for about maybe 60, 70 seconds tops. And in fact, when you looked at the demonstration, they cut in right at the beginning of that. In fact, let me go back to that. They cut in right at the very beginning of that, right here. We'll just go to that, and you'll notice the scene cuts. And of course, they had the same restrictions back then. But what they'll do is they'll cut into it where he releases the gyro. It goes about 58 seconds, and then they cut away from it because that's the end of that parabolic arc. Well, in 1 minute at 500 miles an hour, you haven't gone very far, and certainly not far enough to show any precession in the gyro. But what they're claiming here is that they're on the space station and therefore going forward at a forward velocity of 17,000 miles an hour. So that's where the calculation comes in of 3.7 degrees precession. So there you have it.
So just one more time.
Okay.
In doing a 45 seconds, let's call it a 60-second parabolic arc, that's the minimum, that's the maximum amount of time that they can have 0G. That plane is gonna precess almost 180 degrees, well, 90 degrees or whatever. See that gyro literally spinning, turning, because they're only going 500 miles an hour, but it doesn't matter if they're going 200 miles an hour. the angle of the plane when they start the 0G is heading up at, let's say, 45 degrees. It starts going 20 seconds later, it's level. 20 seconds later, it's diving down again. I think you're not thinking about this right. I don't think they're on the space station, but in a parabolic arc, no matter what the speed, the plane is changing its orientation at a very quick rate.
Yeah, and I see what you're saying, Dave. What I would submit is that I'm 100% sure that the Vomit Comet that's available for public use, that you can buy a ticket to go on, is not the be-all, end-all of that technology. And so I've been under the impression for a long time that the governments of the world, with their unlimited budgets and super secret, unacknowledged programs, have technologies and aircraft that are capable of parabolic trajectory causing, quote unquote, weightlessness for far longer than that period. And so the vortex, or the pinnacle of their sort of parabolic curve, may last way longer than 40 seconds. It may be 10 minutes if we're talking about a much larger
John.
Let me go
further than that, though. You're forgetting that they can deck out the inside of the plane in a green screen, and the entire background that you see here is false. So when you're saying that we would see the plane, not really, because if this man is in the plane and it's going up and down, as long as the background's changed, you would never see that. What you're describing, Dave, you would be able to put a stationary background behind the person in the plane. We would never see that change.
Right. So, and there's one other possibility as well, David. This may not be on well, yeah, I agree. There is more than one, but I'm just going to mention another one. Another very distinct possibility is they have taken a container of some kind with, that has atmosphere in it, and they've elevated it up with like balloons, kind of like what they did with Felix Baumgartner, and then they simply let it go. Okay, they let it go and go into a free fall condition. Which of course would appear as weightlessness, from inside of the cabin, right? This way you're not.
Go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say, and then this way you have no forward velocity, so that kind of solves your problem. You're only falling on a simple z-axis.
Right. So when you said that we're in the Vomit Comet, that's where I was thinking, a while ago, that they could drop something, let it free fall for, I don't know, how long, and use gyros to keep it perfectly stable so they can do all their silly experiments.
Yeah, that makes sense too. I see what you're saying, and that could
very well get a cylinder, have some gyros to keep it stable, drop it from 120,000 feet at free fall speed. How long would they have weightlessness for?
I don't know. I'd have to calculate it, but quite a while at 120,000 feet. How long did Baumgartner fall? He fell for several minutes, didn't he?
Right.
Well, so there you have it. It's the same laws of physics are going to apply, plus or minus a little wind drag.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that that what you guys are saying, to me, I don't think it works on a Vomit Comet, but it works in a whole bunch of other ways.
I think once you see that the inside of a plane can be done in a green screen, then think of how easy everything is. That everything we see, and I don't know if you've ever seen the 4K. I think I sent it to you one time, David. The 4K video of Mark Kelly. Yeah, and clearly he's in front of a green screen. It's
low res green screen.
Right. Yeah, because the 4K is him and everything to his right and left, and then everything behind him is very blurry, which is not, one of the qualities of 4K. It's not included, and so it just became clear to me. Okay, I see what they're doing. Is you could go on the Vomit Comet and do a bunch of these parabolic moves. And if it's a green screen behind the person, then you would be able to input the stationary ISS background, which is going to erase any kind of effects that you would see in the plane, and that's what they kind of train these astronauts on, is how to maintain their appearance and maintain looking at while the parabolic things are going on. At least my opinion.
Okay. All right.
Now, this part here is a little different, but when he's actually got the thing spun up and it's maintaining that perfect vertical axis, first of all, he's wearing that hat, so he must be in space. But the other thing is, like right here, for all we know, they could be using something as simple as a string, like it's hanging from a string, and they're not in space at all.
It's possible, but it would be pretty hard to hang it at an angle on the string. Well, I suppose if it's I don't know how they would do that, John, but maybe, maybe.
There is a recent Tim Peake segment with a gyroscope. Well, I can try and find it. I know I've seen it before, but I don't remember.
Magicians use it. Magicians use that trick, the old string in the rafters trick, and actually NASA's been caught doing that for moonwalks as well. I've seen some videos where there'll be astronauts on the moon, and you can see a glint and a glitter of a string going all the way up to the top of the frame, right above the astronaut. So I mean, I just don't put anything past them, and sometimes something simple may be the answer, but it could be any number of things that we mentioned. But free fall is an interesting one. And you'd never be able to tell if he was in free fall as long as he's strapped in, which he appears to be, and he's wearing that hat. Then
yeah. Well, and that's the whole thing is, I mean, since NASA and Hollywood are one and the same thing, they have a huge arsenal of ways to trick people into believing that these people are actually up there. Look at some of the Hollywood movies. Look at Gravity. With Sandra Bullock and stuff like that, and even the Big Bang Theory, where Howard Wolowitz is supposedly on the ISS. It looked absolutely identical to what we see up there, and of course this is a TV show, but it's exactly the same technique that they're using, and they make a big deal out of how they made this a production type thing. For the Big Bang Theory, like it was hard, which it wasn't, and this technology has been around for a long time, clearly. So it's just another one of their tricks in their bag. That's all.
I still get people who write me emails and talk to me about how many edits are done, or I don't see any edits between these 2 minutes of time. I don't see any edits for this 5 minutes of time, which is just crazy that people still think that you would be able to see every edit. It's insane. You would not see every edit. Be very easy for them to edit two pieces together and you would never know. So just because you're counting the amount of time in between noticeable edits means absolutely nothing.
Exactly. Yeah, that means absolutely nothing. You're right, because it could have been any amount of time. So yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, David, I mean, I see what you're saying, and it is possible. I'm gonna have to think about that for a little bit, because I see what you're saying. If the vomit comet is actually changing orientation, of course, that doesn't mean either that he could not be in some sort of a gimbaled cage inside of the vomit comet, where he looks like his background and everything in it is staying stable, where the plane is also rotating around him, right?
As there's lots of options. He could be in a gimbaled cage. It could be dropping down. The gyroscope could not even be real. I mean, there's a 100 solutions, except the fact that they're on the ISS, falling around the Earth at 17,500 miles an hour or whatever they're on.
Exactly, and that's the one thing that we do know absolutely unequivocally is if they were really on Skylab and they were really going 17,000 miles an hour, there would have been precession. Absolutely no way to deny it, and the Globers cannot come back and say, well, your gimbals, the connection points on your gimbals have too much friction because it's floating in free space, right? So there's no excuse for this. So they've either been busted dead to rights in a lie, which of course they have been, or they're whizzing around in a spacecraft 17,000 miles an hour on a perfectly level plane and not changing orientation at all.
One last quick question, and I'm going to jump off. Are there supposedly gyros on the current ISS? Because if there were, it wouldn't rotate with the Earth, so there can't be. Is that a clear assumption?
Well, what is supposedly on all spacecraft is this. We go back to the infamous inertial navigation system, the INS, right? Which is a composite of several gyroscopic instruments, not the least of which they're actually using supposedly in the ISS. They're using like laser gyros, which interestingly enough work off the Sagnac effect. Which, if there wasn't any ether, the Sagnac effect wouldn't work. So that in and of itself kind of amuses me that they openly admit that it works via the Sagnac effect, and yet Einstein says, well, no, the ether doesn't work, so so whatever.
my question was, like, when the shuttle or whatever connects with the ISS, what stops it from tumbling out of orientation?
I think what he's saying is kind of what I was getting confused on. If the gyro tells it where it's to maintain, then the craft itself would adjust. You know what I'm saying? So it's not like,
well, it can't be, because it holds it rigid in space. So every 180 degrees as it falls around the planet, it's going to change its orientation to the planet. It doesn't do that, does it? Does the bottom of the ISS always face the Earth, or every 180 degrees, the bottom becomes the top?
The bottom of the ISS always faces the Earth when you look at the NASA animations.
All right.
Right.
So therefore, it could not have gyros holding it rigid. So the question is, when the ISS is on there, or literally just an astronaut pushing off a wall, where does that force go? What's stopping it from tumbling out of its position?
Right. Well, yeah, obviously they're little thrusters.
It doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist, because you're right.
Cartoon.
In order for it to be held there by any gyroscopic action, you'd have to have a gyro the size of Mile High Stadium. It'd have to be a really big gyro in order for it to keep it from doing that. The gyros in the INS are simply to be used as indicators, obviously not to counteract for any rotational force. They will do their thing. They will stay rigid in space, but then it would be up to the aircraft itself, or the ISS, to provide the necessary thrusting to change the orientation of it. And of course, all this is supposedly done magically by gravity. Otherwise, they would have to have those thrusters on continuously, keeping the nose of the ISS down. Gee, where have we heard that before? But anyway, does that answer your question, David?
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Yeah, and once
I'll be listening. I'll see you guys later.
Well, I was going to say, once it's made, a half in orbit, then the gyroscope, say you start at the base point and then you do a half in orbit, that gyroscope would have precessed all the way to where it's now upside down. And so in order to keep the ISS belly down, right? And so, yeah, I'd really love to see how they have that configuration.
Yeah, that's I agree totally, John. That's, like I said, that's exactly what confuses me about this. So hopefully some of those smart globers out there, maybe even Flat Earth Math, can tell us how that is accomplished, because I would love to hear that, because I honestly don't know. And I'm not being facetious or sarcastic. I honestly don't know. To me, it's magical. And to say that the gravity is going to pull it around is just ludicrous.
Well, I think that, from what I remember, and again, I'm not going to claim that I know this perfectly, but there's something called reaction wheels that they say are based off of the gyroscope. So it's not the gyroscope itself. That just gives it a reference point. So the gyroscope gives you the reference point in relation to the surface. And then from that, again, I'm stupid as far as this goes, but there's a connection between that and the wheels. Wheels on the bus go round and round,
Right. Well, yeah, but still, even if those reaction wheels or whatever are having any effect on the orientation of the ISS, they would have to be, at least to some degree, equaling the mass of the station, right? Otherwise, they're not going to have any effect. At least that's the way I would see it.
Yeah, I should probably look into that greater, and maybe we can cover it next week and get a clearer picture of what we're talking about.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. Of course, next week's going to be Christmas, so we won't be doing it next week. And then the week after that is New Year's, so we'll have to see what we do on that. But yeah, I think this is a really good, interesting subject to look at, and that's why I started looking at that orbital mechanics, because I know very little about it. But what I do know about it, and maybe it's just me, doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because there just seem to be too many magical forces being taken care of. And it all comes back to gravity doing it all, and I just don't see how that's even possible to happen. So yeah, I think that'd be a great idea. I'm sorry, John?
No, I just said the whole thing's redonkulous, because once, and this is something that I always come back to in all of these arguments, and NASA has done a real good job of putting this sort of thing into people's minds. We have the ISS up there, and we can see it with our telescope and our with our naked eyes. And so the thing is, though, unless you can prove curvature, and unless you can prove axial rotation with physical repeatable experiments, all this other stuff is irrelevant. And, for one thing, the ISS being the size of a football field, you would not be able to see something that small from 250 miles away. It's just not possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, the only reason that they say that we can is, you know, when we see it, it's always just after sunset or just before sunrise, which of course, the reason that they say that we can see it at that point is because the sun then is low enough below the horizon in either case to be shooting, you know, light up and reflecting off the bottom of the ISS, which is really interesting because it's absolutely dazzling brilliant, you know, as it traverses all the way across the sky, which again is non sequitur with, you know, with even their model. It would make sense for a period in time, but how it would constantly keep that perfect angle to be able to reflect the light down to your eye all the way across the sky, that's the part that loses it for me. And not only that, you know, when you watch it traverse all the way from your west side of the sky to the east side of the sky, how is it staying lit? Again, these are things that I don't understand, and obviously I'm going to be trying to learn a little bit more about it. And anybody that wants to, you know, contribute to my education, I'd be more than happy to listen.
Well, what they'll say is that the trajectory of it puts it out in such a position to where it's still catching reflections from the sun. But if you think about this for 10 seconds, it doesn't make any sense. And you know, there's no possible way you should see reflected sunlight from the ISS at night, and yet we do. You know, we see that all the time. And so, yeah, crazy.
Right. And again, but it's not, you know, in the deep of night. You know, it's within, typically within, I think, half hour to 45 minutes before and after, or before sunrise or after sunset, because again, you know, you have to have some angle from the sun to the ISS. Too far after dark or too far before sunrise, you would have the Earth completely obscuring any light coming from the sun, in theory, right?
Right, understood. But even still, I don't know. To me, once it reaches over the, you know, your horizon, and say, you know, it's just the twilight hours or just after sunset, I still don't see those angles being achieved. And so, I don't know. I guess further study would have to go into it. But to me, it just seems like common sense geometry and the way that light works. But you know what I mean?
I totally know what you mean. So,
Yeah.
you know, here we are sounding like we have a lot of questions only because we do. And, you know, the magical gravity answer just isn't going to cut it, guys.
Right.
Especially when we know that gravity is for the most part been pretty debunked.